You're watching the monthly Forestry Briefing with Forestry Journal. I'm editor John McNee. I'm joined by Deputy Editor Jack Haugh, and we're in the offices of Forestry Journal for the latest in our regular series where we discuss the latest news stories. And normally we do this type of thing out in the woods. But we haven't been out in the woods lately. We've been here putting the final touches on the latest issue, the January issue of the magazine. And we're in a festive mood.
I've even put a hat on. I think we should probably say before we go any further, John, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, absolutely. But like I say, we've been confined to the office just lately, but you've still been managing to get out and about. So you were recently at the Forestry Summit in Scotland. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think this is probably one of the main stories from the last month, since we actually spoke about in the last briefing, you might remember, but the Forestry Summit was held last week, as we are recording this, last week in Perth, and that saw around about 80 stakeholders from across Scottish forestry essentially meet to discuss Scotland's recent Woodland Creation Summit. Now, you might remember in the last 12 months that we have the figures for that dropped to about 8,000 hectares of new woodland were created in Scotland. First time in half a decade that been below 10,000, and a real drop year on year from what it was the 12 months before that. Now, I was lucky enough, we were invited and got the chance to go along to the Forestry Summit, and what that essentially saw was a lot of people getting the chance to have their voices heard, to air their concerns about why this is. This was the point, to kind of sum up, the whole point of this was to discuss why this happened, what can we do to avoid it in the future, and what can we do to essentially make the process better. Now, it was a really interesting day. It kind of started off with Mary Goujon, the Rural Affairs Secretary, which kind of shows you how seriously certainly wanted to present this. They brought the big guns from government there. She started off by, making one headline-grabbing announcement that this year, for this planting season, a record level of woodland creation applications have already been approved by Scottish Forestry, essentially in their efforts to try and get things back on track. Now, it's about, I should have the figure, but I don't off the top of my head, but it's about 13,111 hectares, which is marginally more than it was a couple of years ago. But one of the big talking points this kind of leads on to, and one of the big talking points from the day is that you're seeing levels of woodland creation applications being accepted, but there's generally a lot of slippage. So last year, for example, around about 10,000 hectares were approved, only 8,000 were actually came to fruition. Now, a few key themes came from out the day, and a few key points that everyone generally agreed on were the reasons behind this slippage, the reasons behind the woodland creation struggles in Scotland. Not necessarily in a particular order, but number one, and this was kind of unanimous, I would say, the woodland creation process and problems with that. Now, in a poll that was held before the briefing, that was voted the number one reason for woodland creation struggles in Scotland, and it was voted the number one thing that foresters would like to change in Scotland. And on the day, that was generally the theme from the discussions that were had to that.
What is it specifically about the process that's holding people back? Good
question. So I think there's a few concerns. I think one, people generally say is that it's quite clunky, it's very time consuming. This maybe leads on to another point which I'll get to in a second, but I think there's generally problems with timescales not being met by various parts of the system. So there's generally, and I won't go into the too fine detail, but there's generally you sending this in, you'll get a reply by X date, and quite often that's actually not getting met, or certainly that was the accusation that was being levelled. I wouldn't want to say necessarily that's 100% true, but that's what's being levelled at forestry officials from the general discussion that was had there, that dates are being missed, etc, etc. So that was certainly one process, one part of the process that people weren't happy with. And as I say, that was the kind of the overriding theme from there.
So suspicion that people are entering this process and just being left scunnered by it, effectively. Yeah. And then they don't. They go in wanting to create woodland, and by the end of the process, they've lost interest.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think scunnered would be a really good word to kind of sum that up. And yeah, interestingly, I think this is probably one point that came from the eve of the conference. You remember this, John, but and we've mentioned this in the past, kind of big vociferous complainers about the process. And make sure I get that word right. Complainers about the process is Scottish Woodlands. Now, on the eve of the conference, they came out with quite a few kind of striking claims. One being that the process and the restrictions of the process has actually led to an increase of abuse against their staff. I think there was both racial and vocal abuse, basically. So I think somewhere in this cog, somewhere in the system, there are a lot of concerns about the process and how slow how it's perceived to be so slow in terms of actually getting woodland creation applications finalised, done, trees in the ground. And that probably leads on to the kind of second big complaint and the second big concern about, or certainly the second big reason that there's kind of a delay and a kind of barrier. That's the best word. We'll get there eventually. I'll spit the words out eventually. But probably one of the biggest barriers to woodland creation was, and again I'll say perceived, because this is what was put across by foresters. It might not necessarily be the reality, or I'm sure it can be disputed, but that there's a kind of lack of leadership from forestry officials, and that would you take to be your government bodies, that would take to be government officials as well. And generally kind of in the kind of mingling before and after. Now I obviously spoke to just a handful of people, but a kind of common concern and a common complaint that was voiced was that if, say for example, there's a woodland creation application process for, let's say, some Sitka, but as you know with Sitka, and we've seen this recently, we've seen this for years, there's always going to be some complaints, and that could be from one person, could be 2 people, 3 people, etc, etc. But generally I think there was a feeling from foresters, if there are some complaints, forestry officials tend to be minded to side with them, or certainly minded to give them equal balance to the application that's been put in, equal balance to the detailed reasoning in the application from the forester. So it's kind of, as foresters are seeing it, again I'll just say this is how they're perceiving it, I'm sure it'll be disputed, but as they're seeing it, the kind of weighting isn't quite right on these applications, and that's generally leading to a lot of frustration from foresters. As I say, they could be putting in an extremely detailed application. We know the reasons why we need to grow more timber, for example, but if you have a few complaints in the community, as they see it, they're generally being given equal weight to those kind of the reasons.
I think there should be perhaps a presumption for planting.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really fair kind of way to put it. I think we've kind of seen that in England recently with the Forestry Commission announcing changes, where it's going to be, again, this is just kind of more, it's only started, so we don't quite know yet how this is going to be in reality, but there's more of a kind of emphasis on presumption of planting. So I think that's certainly something people would like to see from it there.
So it sounds like a good event where there were a lot of people sort of speaking from the same hymn sheet, as it were, just a question of what happens next.
Totally, and this is the thing, and I think at one point that has to be made is that a lot of these complaints are long-standing. There wasn't really anything new said or anything that shocked, and I spoke to a few kind of Scottish forestry staff members as well, and they generally weren't shocked by what was said, and to be honest, they had their own kind of concern, the kind of similar complaints about a lot of these things too. So nothing really new was kind of said. I think this was really useful for, though, it gave a chance to air it directly, one, to the Rural Affairs Secretary, who may not necessarily hear these directly, 2, forestry, government ministers, government helpers, all these kind of things heard these directly. In terms of what happens next, in the immediate future, Paul Lowe, the interim CEO of Scottish Forestry, he's agreed to take all these concerns, collate them, bring them together, and meet Mary Goujon in the new year. Date's not been set yet for when they're going to meet, but he's going to take them and say that these were the kind of key themes from the day. Ones we've mentioned there, a few others just to maybe touch on very briefly, but deer management was mentioned there as well. Slippage, I think this is just a key point just to mention. I'll get on to the second thing that was agreed, but slippage is a big thing. And Helen Mackay, the chief forester, made a really good kind of point, which I would just kind of very briefly touch on, that she said, we know there's slippage, we know it's there, but one of the problems is we only really have anecdotal evidence. We only really have people saying X reasons why it's falling, Y reasons why we're kind of falling behind. We don't really have kind of scientific kind of gathered evidence. So she wants that. Maybe it's one of the next steps too, to kind of be, why are we actually missing? Let's get some real concrete evidence there. But yeah, in terms of the kind of long-term step, there was kind of general agreement that at some point, again, there wasn't much detail on this, but at some point a roadmap's going to be agreed for Scottish forestry in terms of next steps, in terms of what's going to actually improve things in the country. Now, again, no date was set for that. We don't know when that's going to be, but I think we kind of all agree these kind of concrete things will have to happen, because it's been great. Complaints have been aired. I think that was great. I think it was great for people to get together. And it was a real mix of people. You had Scottish Woodlands, Confor, you had estate managers, you even had the RSPB, etc. But I think it's a real good mix of people, but it's just what happens next. And I kind of made this point in a wee piece I put on the website, and it's in the magazine, in January's edition of the magazine too. But it might take a few planting seasons for this to kind of come to fruition, for these kind of changes or the kind of concerns to properly be met, but can we wait that long? That's what we'll find out.
Good question. Do you think perhaps they need a national wood strategy for Scotland?
Segue, it's almost like we planned that.
Because I tell you who does have a national wood strategy now, England.
They do, and this is again one of the kind of... December's been a month of blueprints, I think, in forestry. Blueprints and meetings, which is...
A lot of meetings.
A lot of meetings, a lot of being
speeches.
inside. Yes, a lot of speeches, a lot of discussions, a lot of people saying a lot of really interesting things. But yes, the National Wood Strategy for England, this was first announced at last year's Confor conference.
That they would be doing it.
Exactly, and 12 months on, it was presented in full.
Now this is something prepared from the industry. It should be made clear. Co-authored by Tom Barnes from Vast Timber, and Andy Leach from Confor, with input from various other people across the industry, and is to serve as guidance, targets, something to aim for policymakers and governments.
Yes, a lot of those buzzwords. Yeah, essentially it's a kind of, again, it's in many ways it's a roadmap, that kind of roadmap Scotland might eventually have in itself. And what the strategy does is sets out 6 key goals and 6 key kind of target areas that government, industry, and a collaboration between the kind of two and other stakeholders have to work on to address England's timber woes, I think. Which
I wrote a few of them down. One of the ambitions being 17.5% woodland cover in England by 2050.
Which is, I think, important to know. That was one of the goals for government, and that's actually higher than the government's 16.5%. So that was one thing, and that's generally been quite a theme, whether it be Tom and Andy, whether it be the Climate Change Committee. I think a lot of people saying that 16.5 goal just isn't high enough, so that was certainly a key point to take from there.
104,000 hectares of new stocked conifer forests by 2050 again.
And again, that probably takes us on to the point, and you've got a fact in this, John, in terms of one striking thing that came from this was the amount of conifer forests that have been lost in England. You've got the figure?
Well, since 1998, the area of conifer in England has shrunk by 40,000 hectares, which in acres, Jack, is...
100,000?
Yeah, about 100,000. I was hoping I was going to catch you out there. But so I mean, we can see just how dramatically, how much area we've lost, and how much. Well, do you know how much timber that would be if we roughly, I do have it written down here, so I can't pretend I don't know, but roughly about 16 million metres cubed of timber. And I think that was about 8 harvests worth of timber, so that's substantial. That is absolutely substantial. And if we just kept restocking, if we'd maintained that area as conifer woodland, how much further forward would we be now?
It's insane actually to kind of put not too fine a point on it. And you need to remember, England, as other countries in the UK, is continuing to plant fewer softwood or less softwood than it does hardwood. So this is kind of a lot of themes and a lot of kind of concerns over the last few years that have really come to a head in this strategy.
Another point is to revise the application process. So we're hitting on the same points.
There's something about paperwork, isn't there, which just seems to be a bone of contention for a lot
of people. And the thing was, Scotland used to be lauded as having simplified its process to the point where it was exceeding, all of these ambitions for woodland creation. And I don't know why exactly. Obviously, no one really knows exactly what has gone wrong since then. But England is now in the position, and England and Scotland are both in the position where they're saying they need to make the process easier and faster for people to get trees in the ground. Yeah,
and I think so for instance, Scotland's target of 18,000 hectares. Do you know what that's? I'm going to test you here. Do you know what that's the equivalent of in terms of? What city would that be equivalent to?
No, I don't know.
We're in it.
Glasgow, right?
Glasgow. So that land area would be the equivalent of Glasgow. So that really kind of puts that challenge into perspective. But it also shows you why that we need to make it easy to do, because it's not a small area. It's a big area of trees we need to plant every year in Scotland. But that's just a kind of side note.
Yeah, and we've had the timber and construction roadmap talking of what you actually do with this timber. We've had that as well. Like unexpectedly, sort of dropped It was still being talked about at the Confor's Policy Conference, and then a week later.
A week later it just appeared out of thin air. And I got to say, it's kind of long awaited. You've seen David Hopkins at TD UK saying it's kind of long awaited, and they're glad to finally see. And
so again, the ambition here is to get more house builders and more builders in general using timber in construction. Is the point of this roadmap?
Yeah, well, you kind of got a good fact there in terms of the amount of new build homes in England that are using timber.
Again, it's kind of startling the differences between the two nations. In Scotland in 2019, 92% of new houses built used timber frames, and in the same year in England it was 9%. So the issue here is entirely about changing attitudes. It seems like it can be done relatively well in one nation of the UK, and yet in the other not.
No, it's very surprising, and not to kind of dwell too much on more blueprints, but I think some of the key areas which the timber construction roadmap wants to look at, the kind of key, I guess, concerns, or not concerns, that's maybe the right word, but certainly the key points it wants to get to is, and one of them, this may be the reason for it, maybe the kind of still attitudes towards using timber in construction, but it certainly wants to get that message across that timber in construction is safe, it's fire retardant, etc., which I think maybe that's one of the reasons why maybe they're still kind of
there's a concern about fire safety.
And
if I use wood in this house, does that make it more likely to burn down than if I use steel and concrete?
Exactly.
Which surprises me, because it wouldn't even occur to me that was an issue. You'd think you could have moved beyond that, but I guess we read so much about new timber buildings being built and stuff that so we need to convince insurers and government people that it's safe to use timber in construction, and someone has to make that case with and provide the evidence to support that.
And you just have to hope this will be that. So you've got these two documents that come out that broadly say the same thing. Wood is good, and we need to use it a lot more. This is speaking of England. You can say that for the whole of the UK, but we need to use a lot more. We need to import a lot less wood than we're doing right now. All these kind of points are there's a lot of crossover.
It's hugely important for, among other things, for reaching net zero. I think a lot of people don't, when you in conversation with them, don't really understand that when a woodland is felled, they think that the carbon that was being sequestered in those trees is gone. But if you're using it in houses, it continues to stand for however many decades or centuries, and then you replant those areas and sequester more carbon, and you reduce all of the carbon that's spent on the creation of more concrete and steel and transporting that around the world, and the transport of the import of timber. I mean, it seems, I guess to us, it seems like a case that's easy to make.
Totally. It's a complete no-brainer. Why? How can it be better that we're bringing wood in or timber in from wherever, country X,
China?
Yeah, exactly, or wherever it's going to be. Russia in the past, maybe not directly, but all this timber we bring in, it has to be shipped, has to be transported by train, boat, whatever it is. A lot of timber haulage a lot of time. How can that be better than actually growing it here? And I don't think it is. And all that really does, and this again, all that really does is take the problem that we have in terms of getting the proper use for our forests. A lot of the time, obviously, we're racing with biodiversity needs and all that, which topic for another day maybe. All that does is then push those issues onto another country and say, you deal with that. We'll have these nice forests for whatever, but never for timber use. Whereas why is that better? Why is that better? So a lot of issues, a lot of discussion, and hopefully these two documents will lead to genuine change. Again, like the Forestry Summit, we won't know for a while, but both generally have been received fairly well. The only kind of sort of minor criticism I've seen of the National Wood Strategy came from the ICF, again, who were broadly positive about it. Yeah, exactly. But they did say, and the kind of line is, it doesn't reflect the breadth of our membership. So, I think there is maybe just
a bit of hesitancy to say that this is, we fully support something that we haven't been totally 100%
that's gospel maybe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which is probably quite hard for this time of year.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's. Shall we leave the documents to one side for now?
Well, what else is there to discuss? It's not been a month for terrifically great news on other aspects, from just conversations that we've had, things that we've been seeing and hearing about. It seems like we're in a bit of a, I think there's a bit of a slump, isn't there, in forestry, certainly within harvesting.
I don't think that's an unfair word to use.
And this isn't new. This has sort of been going on for the last 18 months, but it's getting really quite noticeable now.
Well, we've heard and spoken to some of the people that we obviously know in the industry. We've heard from several harvesters who are just not harvesting it. They're not cutting any more wood because they have wood lying at the roadside that's not being picked up by the sawmills. And it kind of goes back to the point we're talking about, and that kind of overriding point is that at the moment there's a big decline in house building because of high inflation rates. So again, not a single thing that's really actually directly to do with forestry, but that knock-on effect gets to forestry ultimately. So because there's a decline in house buildings, a decline in demand for timber, sawmills then don't need as much timber. You can see the kind of domino effect we're having here. So these things are all kind of beginning to come to a head, or certainly have come to a head, and you're seeing the effects.
That has an effect on people working in harvesting, people working in sawmills, people building machinery, who are now seeing a slump in sales and projecting a further slump in sales for however much longer. Hopefully not very long. But we don't know.
No, you hope not. And unfortunately, we had obviously the sad news that more than sort of dozens of staff at Rotney, the Swedish manufacturer, are going to lose their jobs. They're having to really cut their cloth essentially, and this is because of a decline in demand, and mainly particularly a decline in demand in Europe right now.
Yeah. So not just something that's limited to the UK. These are inflation pressures, cost of living pressures that are happening.
But
widely.
You hope, and maybe kind of look for the positives, that a quote kind of stood out for me, that the TD UK had their recent global market conference, which kind of takes a big look at this, and one kind of quote stood out for me, and I don't actually have the name of the person that said this, so apologies if you are watching, send me the hate mail in the post, but this speaker said the current short-term challenges did not change the long-term positive outlook for timber and construction. So it is a slump now, but I think we will at some point get over it. But the worry is, people may lose their jobs, people may struggle, and it's not fun. It's just we can't really put a positive spin on it. Much more than that, one other thing, again, just one kind of minor positive point to mention is that, and again it goes back to conferences and discussion debate. At COP28, the UK was one of 28 countries to agree to a really kind of key point that wood production is important to achieving net zero. So this is a major kind of, the first kind of time this has happened. So I think there's some stormy waters now, but I think we are going to hopefully see the kind of fruits of some kind of brighter days ahead.
Yeah, I think so. Let's hope so. And of course, we will be covering some more positive, uplifting, inspiring, and practical, positive stories and features in our January issue, because we like to get the year off to a good start. So you can look forward to that appearing in print and online and elsewhere next month. And if you haven't yet, please do make sure to read the December issue of Forestry Journal and the December issue of essentialARB. And if you haven't yet, for goodness sake, unfold your wall planner and get it pinned up on the wall so that you can plan for the year ahead. Yeah, because we're certainly going to be very busy in 2024, aren't we?
We are, there's a lot of, so I'm just going to, I don't know if you wanted me to fold this out, but I'm going to fold it out. Maybe you can't even see it on screen, but there it is, nice wall planner.
And who's on the back?
Who's on the back?
Yeah, let's have a look at the back.
On the back, nice big, you can't miss
subtle.
that. Yeah, subtle. For Sovos helmets, if you can't see that there. And we've also got like a bunch of our partners on the front as well, so thank you so much.
And on here you will see lists of dates for all the important dates for various different events for the coming year, many of which we'll be going to, and including the likes of the ARB show and APF 2024, which
I'll come back on screen now.
Of course is something to look forward to.
Yes, yeah, a big hopefully, despite the kind of doom and gloom which is being felt by many people, hopefully it's going to be a good year ahead with these events, with with APF, APF's going to be the first time people see the LF8 forwarder from Pharma, so there are going to be some major things happening throughout the year.
Well, it's all about, it's got a lot to do with positive thinking and planning and preparation and thinking where you're going to be in a year's time and just sort of working towards your goals and achieving your ambitions. Yeah, well, that's about as much positivity as I can bear to spout.
Yes, I think we just end by saying thanks to everyone for watching, for reading through the year.
Absolutely, thanks to all our subscribers. Please check out the Forestry Journal website for more content over the festive period, because we don't ever really stop.
No.
And neither does forestry. So keep an eye on that, and we'll be back with another forestry briefing in the new year.
And hopefully outside next time, but Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.